Pro Mac 55 was the very first saw I ever got to run. Not the first saw that was a Mac, but the first saw in general. This saw belonged to my grandfather, and he used to let me use it all the time to cut wood and trim trees. And eventually the condenser went bad, so it lost spark, and he, in his opinion, always saw it as a throwaway saw. He's like, well, it's a Mac, you can't find parts for it anymore, go ahead and throw it out and we should just go get another saw. I said, oh, the heck with that, that's the greatest saw I've ever run. And I'd run some Huskies that some friends of mine had, and they don't compare to these stock at all. This saw will eat this 041 alive, and this 041, as you guys have seen in a previous video, is fairly modified. It's not like to the brim modified, but it's decent. And it still won't cut as fast, and still won't have as much torque as this Pro Mac 55 does. A common misconception is that Macs, like Pro Mac 55s, the Super Pro 60s, 75, Super Pro 70s, the 850s, the 80 and 81s, the Super Pro 105s, the 125s, all the CP saws, they're all based on displacement. The model number is not based on displacement. This is not 55 cc's, it is 57. This is 61. They are within the same weight class. This saw has more throttle response, and it has way more torque. It is just a mean saw, and they're about the same era as well. So what year this is, I don't know. I think it was a late 70s, and the reason I think this is late 70s is because it has a single jet carb. A lot of people don't like single jet carbs. I think it's perfectly fine. I want to leave this saw completely original. Right now it has an ignition chip in it because the condenser was bad, and I wanted to just get it running, and so I threw a chip in it. It came out of my Super Pro 81. That saw is going to have to keep a chip, and that has to do with the crank. And I'll get into that later, but these Pro Mac 55s are just beastly. They run great out of the box. I would like to get another one, and I want to modify it and see how much further I can go and how much meaner I can make it, but they're kind of hard to find. I even have the original bar for this saw too, by the way. My grandfather had, prior to this, a Pro Mac 1010, from what he told me, and he eventually wore that thing out. I think he had both of these saws at the same time, but he used that 1010 all the time and wore it out. And he always said that this saw had more power and more torque. Why? I don't know. It's just a Mcculloch thing. They have a certain run of saws, certain models, certain years that just run hard. And this era of Pro Mac 55 just runs hard. They don't really need porting done to them. That's why I've never touched it. Now, later on down the road, I do want to take it apart and put maybe try and find crank seals and put crank seals in it. But most of all, I want to reseal the tank. The tank leaks right about here. I want to put all new intake gaskets, new exhaust gaskets. I want to inspect everything. Looking down through the intake port on this thing, this piston is immaculate. This cylinder is just spotless. Like I said, my grandfather bought this saw. And even though it may look rough and looks like it's got a lot of hours on it, it really doesn't. It's a very low hour saw. Matter of fact, if you look here, let me get you guys down. See this? There's not even a notch in this, the pull start ring right there. There is no notch. Usually you start running these things and they eventually get a notch. The Steel 041, it's kind of got a notch worn into the tank right here. But this one is like spotless. It just basically banged around in the back of his truck and had things put on it, and for the most part it sat in the cabinet. He always had to sit in the back of the back cabinet on the bottom shelf, and that's where a lot of these scratches and dings came from. But inside it's like brand new. He took very good care of these saws. How he wore out that 1010, I don't know, but I've got the bar that came off of it. It's on my 81 right now, and I'll show you. I mean, these two saws, like I said, same weight class. This one will eat it alive, and it's 4cc smaller. So one day we'll have to go ahead and freshen this saw up and get everything sealed up and clean it up real nice, and just stick that bar and chain on here and do some cuts and just see what it does stock in comparison to this 041. I guarantee you it's going to be faster. I just know it is. So let's go ahead and clear the bench off, and I will get my other Mac stuff and all these other Mac projects put up on the bench, and let's talk about, you know, porting Mccullochs and the different models and the different different runs of engines. So let's just have ourselves a good old time and hang out and talk Macs. Okay, so what I've got on the bench right now is my Super Pro 81, and I've got all the parts that I'm going to be using on it. Sitting here, I've got a new crank and a new flywheel for it. These are both from an 850. These are both the original flywheel and the original crank. This original piston and rod, I mean, this piston's in pretty good shape. I mean, you can even still see the numbers on it. It's not scored up super bad. It does have some residue on it, and that residue is from when it was sitting. I need to clean it up better. When I got this saw, it was locked up. It's somebody had it sitting outside in a puddle, and it took me over a year to get it freed up. I've had this saw for 5 years now, and it's been apart for 4 because I've been trying to find parts. One of those parts is an intake boot, and I've got a new one right here. This is only within the last year that intake boots have started being made. My original plan was to get rid of the intake boot altogether and to get rid of the anti-vibe. The tank has holes in the bottom of it, and I've got a plan to fix that. And one of my previous plans was to find a 1010 top section or use like a Pro Mac 55 top section and put it on here and just basically have an 82cc engine in it. But I really want to save this top section. I kind of want to keep the anti-vibe in it. The anti-vibe in these Macs is actually pretty good, unlike like the Still AVs, which like flex around a lot. They're horrendous. And these are pretty firm. Mac really thought this through when they were building these saws. They're built for being a faller saw. I mean, in this one here, maybe you can see it, but it's got a full wrap handle. True West Coast saw right here. And I maybe even know who used to run this back in the day, but we're not 100% sure who it was. A friend of mine thinks he knows, but we haven't tried asking him yet. But I really wanted to save this saw. I didn't want to part it out. Most guys would probably just parted it out. You know, sold the jug off and everything else. But you're probably wondering, why am I going to use an 850 flywheel and crank? Well, this crank happens to have a broken keyway in it. Is that a fatal flaw? No. I could still use this crank. Matter of fact, on the way that the flywheel rotates, it'd be up against this shelf. It wouldn't be on the broken end. But it bothers me. Also, the bearings are seized. I needed new bearings. I think I paid like $40 for this crank with the bearings. The only downside to using an 850 crank in an 81 is I can't have points. I really like points ignition systems. And here they are side by side. You can see the points eccentric on the crankshaft. And you can see that the 81 or the 850, I'm sorry, is completely smooth. So there is no points eccentric on it. I needed a new flywheel. There's no differences in the timing between these two flywheels. The main reason is somebody busted fin off, and then they tried busting off the other one to balance it. I don't want to have that. I want to have everything 100% functional. I don't want some jerry-rigged chainsaw. But looking at where the keyways are located and where the magnet is, both keyways point to that magnet to the left. You see what I mean? So both these flywheels are within the same time. Then I compared the cranks. Where's that keyway? Well, that keyway is lined up with the crank journal. So there is no timing difference between the two, which means I can use my stock coil. Whether this one's any good, actually no, I do know this coil is good because I put it on my Pro Mac at one point. So I know this coil's still good, and I'm going to have to use an ignition chip on it because I can't run points because this crank has no provision for running points on it. The biggest cripple of these Macs is, at least in the opinion of a lot of saw builders, is the exhaust. And to be honest, I don't think it's that much of a cripple. And I can get into the whole theory of sonic tuning and things like that, but we'll save that for another video. And I know I'm going to probably make somebody's head spin on that. There's going to be several people that are going to argue differently with me on sonic tuning on two-strokes. But, like I said, we'll get to that later. But I have to agree it is a bit of a cripple because the exhaust gases kind of run into a wall and have to hit 90 degrees. I have a solution on this 81. See that right there? Right now that's just a chunk of aluminum that has no hole in it or anything like that. It's eventually going to become an exhaust plate. And I need to trim the shroud so that way the exhaust peeks through. But that is going to make a much more gradual turn and extend that out, which means, if you think about how sonic tuning works, the closer that wall is, the higher the RPM it's going to tune at, and the further away, the lower the RPM it's going to tune at, in theory. It's kind of like if you're thinking about intake runners. So I use the theory of how intake runners work on like V8s and four-stroke engines, and I applied that to the exhaust on a two-stroke. You know, how far of a distance does that sonic pulse have to travel before it can turn around and feed fuel back in? Because if you think about a four-stroke engine, like a small block Chevy or a Ford or a Mopar, on a dual plane, the valve closes, there's a sonic pulse, goes back, hits the plenum, turns around, comes back, and by the time that comes back, that valve should be opening and it should be kind of helping feed fuel into that cylinder. It's the same thing with this. How much time is there when that exhaust port opens, that sonic pulse moves down, hits the wall, turns around, comes back, starts feeding fuel back in? Is that pulse going to basically go back into that cylinder right as the port closes? So that's what I think the fatal flaw is, these Macs, and you can really turn them up by putting a pipe on them. Okay guys, I've got this tore down, and I want to show and share a few things with you. Matter of fact, I was going to show you this bar. I was talking about how my grandpa wore out his 1010. I'd say he got some pretty good use out of that bar. This is what's going to become the exhaust plate, and it is going to, like I said, just raise that exhaust up, because stock is up here. See what I mean about raising the port and changing the exhaust flow pattern and also kind of sonic tuning it at the same time? See how much higher up it sits? It sits up that much higher. that tin is going to have to get trimmed. The base plate is another story, which is why I was talking about messing around with the anti-vibe mounts. The exhaust port has got this lip in it. Sorry, I gotta get you guys up where you can actually see it. This lip needs to come out. If I was to turn this around and show you the inside, you'll probably see how the chrome is starting to flake off. And that's because that port had gotten kind of hot. I almost don't want to have it re-chromed. I just want to kind of run it the way it is. But if I have to, I'll just... At some point, if this saw locks up, I will probably maybe have it bored a little over and we can get a different piston for it. Maybe like a Husky piston? Man, that would make a lot of people angry. The chamber, though, I kind of want to look at. I know it's round. It's a round chamber. But there's things you gotta change about them. Now, the one thing I don't like about Macs is they've got these little needle bearings in the wrist pin. I don't think that's needed. I mean, yeah, it moves pretty freely, but I don't see it as being necessary. But yeah, the cylinder probably needs to be re-chromed, but I'd like to go ahead and just run it anyway. I know that's going to make somebody angry, but it's my saw. I can do with it what I want. Intake ports. Changing the timing on it. It's got right here, if we look at the intake block, you'll see it kind of has these two half moons to it. And this is what I was talking about with that steel, is it's got these two half moons and you can change the timing in it. I mean, the intake port obviously is squared off on the inside, but it's got this little lip inside the intake port. And you can take that out and that'll change the timing just enough. And then you can also put a little bit of a notch right here in the base of it. And I think that's what I'm going to do. I don't want to go hog wild with it. They don't need a lot done to them. One guy I like watching is Tin Man, and I liked watching his whole build series with that 850 he did for Buck and Billy Ray, and he was worried about going too big on the timing numbers, and I don't blame him. It's really, really hard to find parts for these Macs, so you don't want to go too much with them. The intake timing, like every saw has its own timing numbers. Like that steel, the exhaust timing is like 160 and the intake's 140 currently. A Husky guy will tell you something completely different. They'll say the intake timing needs to be closer to 160 and the exhaust needs to be a little over 160, going closer to like 170. But not every Husky saw is like that. I don't really like Huskies. I'm a Mac guy. I only have one steel. Actually, I've got technically two, but they're both 041s, but I only have one that runs. I've got a couple of Macs that run, but I've got probably more that... Well, I got about 3 Macs that run, but I've got like 2 that don't, and this is one of them. But like I said, you can mess with the intake timing. I'd rather do that with the cylinder than I would with the piston. I would much rather notch it here. Matter of fact, intake boots. For the longest time, you could not get new intake boots. This one would have been okay, but it kind of looks like it maybe has some rips in it. It's all right though, but if you look, it doesn't bounce back. This one does. No, they're about the same. It's not terribly different. But like I said, new intake boots are always best. It's always best to replace those. But with the Max, it was so hard to get them for the longest time. Matter of fact, 125s. I think it was Brian Gray's channel. I found out that they made them for 125s again. I was like, sweet. Now you don't have to make some crazy funky intake for my saw build with a 125 top section. I can actually use a boot. This one came with the springs and everything. I can't remember the company I got them from, but I think it's the same guy that Brian Gray was talking about on his channel that sent them to him. I got them off of eBay. They fit nice and snug. Oh yeah. I mean, they're matched really well. I like them. I was going to do something with an aluminum block, kind of like this on the exhaust, like I'm doing on the exhaust and intake as well. I was going to put this in, and then I was going to make some kind of a block that went between here and then the tin. I was pretty much just trying to get around using these boots, and I was going to eliminate the anti-vibe on it. But because a tank, that's another thing. I needed a tank, and I think I've found a way to fix it. I needed to completely split the tank, but if we look here at the bottom, there goes my air cleaner lid. Can you see the giant holes there in the bottom of it? So I've got a plan for this, and that's to clean up these areas, round them out, put some JB Weld in there, and I've got some red coat tank sealer, and we're going to try it. We're going to see what it does. I really don't want to have to find another tank for that. I found one on eBay a while ago, and the guy wanted, I think, a couple $100 for it. And I was like, well, that's more than I ever paid for the saw. It's kind of like the crank. I paid more for the crank and this flywheel together than I did for the saw as well. I'm probably gonna make somebody cry if I told them how much I paid for the saw. It was dirt cheap. I got it from a friend of mine, and he likes Huskies, but he's really not a Husky guy. He's actually a Dolmar guy. He really likes his. He's got a 143 Dolmar he loves running. Matter of fact, we found an ignition for that thing the other day. Oh, he was so ecstatic. He's been looking for one the entire time I've known him. I've known him for like over 6 years, and we found one the other day. Found out it fit. It was for a 2100 Husky, and we found it on Amazon, and it was like, woohoo! We don't have to jerry-rig an ignition for it. We were gonna try and make it work with some steel parts, but the steel coils wouldn't fit. Anyway, back to Max. I've got two carburetors here. This is a 125. This is a Super Pro 81. They're both Walbro SDCs. They kind of look the same. I mean, there's interchangeable parts between them. The choke shaft is longer on a 125 than it is on an 81. The high-speed screw sits a lot lower than the low-speed screw does, and the linkages are in a little bit different spot. And another thing, the impulse comes in through the roof of the carburetor. On the 125 and on the 81, it comes in through here. Now, if I open these both up, you can look down the centers of them. They are identical. Matter of fact, let me show you the numbers that are on the I don't know if you can read the one on the 81, but it's 3451, 3451. Same butterfly diameter, it's basically the same part number. The Venturi got a dead spider that's living inside this thing. I've had this saw taken apart for a long time, trying to find parts for it. See, Venturi diameter? It's the same. So, if this carburetor, being the same size as a 125, can feed 123 cc's, it should not have any issue feeding 82. There's no reason to change the carburetor on it, in my opinion. So, anyway, we covered the ignition situation, we covered, let's see here, intake timing, blowdown. I don't know what the blowdown number is going to be, but I haven't talked about transfers yet, I don't think. I take quite a few of these videos and try to take the best one that seems to make the most sense to somebody other than myself. So I tend to forget what I've been talking about, but in other videos. So if there's anything that gets repeated, that's why. But if you see inside here, though, the transfers, there's a shelf. It's not 100% 90 degrees, but maybe you can see, maybe not. I really need to get a flashlight out here to show you guys. And it's probably easier if I took the jug off. But if you can flow this case, because right now the transfer, the floor of this transfer as it's going up sits at an angle about that much. If you can get it more angled over, so right now it's like this, when you angle it down more, the better flow that there will be. I really do need to clean up the inside of this case, though. It's still got rust in it from when it was locked up. But yeah, the chrome is one thing I'm kind of concerned of. But I'm almost just willing to just run it the way it is. See what happens. Like, take some Scotch-Brite the cylinder, knock off any of that high stuff, clean it up, and if it looks good after I Scotch-Brite it, I'm going to run it. I'm not even going to worry about that. But it will be an awesome saw when it's done. And a matter of fact, like I said, I want to run it up against my 924, see what happens. It's the same year too. So those 924s came out in 72, and so did the 81s. Or the Super Pro 81s, I think, came out in 1971. But they're the same class of saw. They're both exactly 82 cc's. They both came out in the same era. It's kind of like that ProMac 55 and the 041. They are competitors. This 81 is a competitor to that 924, and I guarantee you, out of the box, these were way, way stronger saws. How much stronger? Well, is way stronger? Well, it's kind of hard to measure that, but running the two, I would say, well, once I get to run the two, I started thinking about the 041 and the 55 again, but once I get to run these two and compare them, I'm going to say this Mac's going to pull harder. That home light does have like a 28-inch bar on it. It does have some exhaust work done, but it's only to the muffler, nothing to the actual cylinder itself. So, I don't know. We'll have to find out in due time. I do need to try and find all the parts that came or that go to this. The box it's been in for like the last 4 years has been just falling apart. So, I need to go try and find all the lost little screws and whatnot. So wish me luck. But yeah, I need to put all this stuff into a better box, and I need to start figuring out what I'm going to do with this rear mount. It's got a bit of a tear in it anyway. I think you can probably see that. It's got a tear in it. So, shoot, I'd love to see these mounts reproduced. Same thing with 125s. I don't think anybody started reproducing them. They started reproducing intake boots, but not anti-vibe mounts. So, But I think I've said in a prior video, I'm not a big anti-vibe guy. But the Macs, on the other hand, the anti-vibe on those, or on these anyway, are a lot better. Matter of fact, here, I'll show you. They won't flex at the front when you got a long bar because of this little snubber. And this is a factory thing, I think. But this little snubber keeps the travel down. And then there's little snubbers on the base plate for when you're reefing on it this way. It'll try and tweak the engine, so that snubber keeps that mount from collapsing, and this one keeps the other one from being overstretched. So that's kind of cool. I'll have to figure something out for that though when I change the upper mount. But Mac thought all that stuff through, and that's kind of the thing I like about Macs, is they went through and thought about everything. These were falling saws. They were meant to be used for work. I mean, look, full wrap handle. I mean, that alone is probably worth the money I paid for this thing. Actually, it's worth a lot more. My 924's got a full wrap handle. I've never seen one for sale, so I think those are the only two saws I got full wrap on. But that 924, it's a pretty beastly saw out of the box. It's strong. Real responsive. Crack. It's got a good crack to it. I need to do. He's getting on the pipes as he's going by. I need to do crank seals in it. I think the crank seals are bad in that. It runs away. You hold it at wide open throttle, it starts four-stroking, and it starts climbing an RPM. It doesn't stay at a nice steady RPM. So it's probably intake or crank seals. That's one thing I'm kind of worried about with this. But the crank seals are actually not bad. You know, they've got some pliability to them still. So I'm not too concerned with the crank seals on this crank. But better bearings than what are on this. I mean, like I said, this thing's got a seized crank bearing. It will not free up. Well, anyway, that's all I got for you guys today. See you in the next video, and have a great day.